At the deficit, Congress has some tough work ahead in the weeks ahead. One of the key roadblocks preventing a supercommittee deal was taxes, which brings us to our questions for today's edition of Fact or Fiction. And joining me from Washington is David Hawkings, editor of the CQ Roll Call Daily Briefing. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning again, Alex.
Let's get right to our first fact or fiction question on what's long been a polarizing issue. Fact or fiction here, Americans' tax rates are high.
Well, I guess you'd have to call that a fiction when you compare America's tax rates to two things. The world average, if you take all the taxes paid in the United States and you compare them against other countries, the U.S. overall taxes are the lowest as a percentage of the economy among developing countries. About 1 in every $4 of the whole economy is paid in taxes. That's lower than any other country in the developed world. In Denmark, it's as high as about 50%. And then if you compare the U.S. taxes now to where they have been historically, lower than almost any year in recent memory. The income tax has been around for 100 years. For about half that time, the tax rate has been higher than it is now for the top earners. Okay,
let's move to fact or fiction. With few corporations pay the 35% corporate tax rate. How's that read?
That's absolutely a fact. 35% is one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. I think only Japan has a higher tax rate, but very, very few companies pay that amount. To oversimplify just a little bit, that's why we have an army of lobbyists living in Washington, because their job is to drive that corporate tax rate down for their one company or their one industry, and year after year they succeed. Now what ends up happening is that some industries pay a lot closer to that than others. The old line manufacturers pay on an average maybe about 25% in taxes, whereas sort of newer industries like the tech industry and the financial services industry, which has been in a boom, pay lower than that. But so it's all over the map, but very few companies actually pay that 35% rate. Some pay nothing at all.
Fact or fiction, America's poorest pay no taxes.
That is a fiction. That is a fiction. Conservatives point out that, in fact, as many as half of Americans in the last year paid no income taxes, no traditional IRS income taxes, but let's remember that 9% were unemployed, some are elderly and disabled, and almost all the rest of them pay those payroll tax deductions that we see on our paychecks that come out for Medicare and Social Security, the so-called payroll tax deductions that the President and Congress are now going to be fighting over in the next month, whether to extend a little tax cut in those for another year.
Okay, this last fact or fiction, the rich pay their fair share. I know where that is.
Well, I guess you'd have to label that one a fiction. Historically, the top 1% of Americans pay a big chunk of the taxes. They say, conservatives say, that in fact they pay about a quarter of the taxes, but they make 40% of the money. That much is true, but again, like we were talking about a minute ago with the corporations, the rich have an enormous advantage in terms of their deductions. They can deduct their capital gains taxes, they deduct charitable donations. They have a better job with their accountants and in some cases their own lobbyists keeping their tax rate low. So in a sense, they pay less than they have in many years in recent years.
And there doesn't seem to be any legislation anywhere along the way soon that would change this?
I don't think that's going to be happening until a year from now. I think we're looking ahead now to the next really big tax debate will probably be in that little space between the next election in November 2012 and when the next Congress and whoever gets elected or re-elected president a year from now take office. Probably a huge fight then about the expiring Bush tax cuts on the richest people, but until then, no real discussion of taxes, only the little discussion in the next month about whether to extend that payroll tax holiday that we've all been benefiting from to the extent of about $1,000 a year for the last year.
Okay, David Hawkings, many thanks as always. Good to see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now for more office politics.